Whenever this text comes up, I often think of a story from the TV show Extreme Makeover Home Edition. Ty Pennington and his crew were building a house for a family whose eldest son couldn't walk, had some difficulty with the use of his hands, and was born blind. Yet he was also an accomplished musician on multiple musical instruments, and he even played in his college's marching band. As Ty interviewed him before they built the house, this young man said, "I view sight as a disability. Those who can see are quick to judge based on what they see. But I don't have that limitation. In fact, my blindness allows me to see more deeply, to judge what is at the core of each person." This being able to see is what today's gospel lesson is all about. Jesus encounters this man on the road, and his disciples ask the question, who sinned that this man was born blind? The man or his parents? Like the people that the young man on Extreme Makeover was talking about, the disciples were quick to judge and try to figure out who was to blame. It's a pretty natural human tendency. And even later on in the story, the Pharisees are quick to pass judgment on Jesus when he heals this man on the Sabbath. It's how we keep our status in society. We judge others and scapegoat them for society's problems so that we don't have to change, so that we don't lose our place in society. It's always someone else's fault when things go wrong. But notice, Jesus flat out rejects the disciples' question and even its premise. He refuses to play this blame game because this is not a matter of morality for Jesus. Instead, Jesus says that this man was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. And by restoring his sight, Jesus exposed how everyone else had wrongly judged this man and how God had seen him all along. So this is the work of God in his life. It makes all of the difference for this man. In fact, this whole story is about him seeing how God has come into his life. The same is true for us and for our stories, is it not? Our lives are filled with the work of God, no matter what situation we may have been born into. Regardless of your wealth, your health, or any other descriptor about you, God is present in your life. Of course, sometimes it can be really hard to see God at work. John doesn't say if the man born blind was a model member of the synagogue, or for that matter, if he was mad at God for being born that way. But what John does give us is an account of a man who gets an extreme makeover when Jesus comes to him, and he goes on to tell others about it. Notice in the story, the man's testimony grows bolder with each telling of his story, because telling his story, that's part of his makeover. First, he says that Jesus is a man. Then he's a prophet. Then he does something that has never been done since the world began. He opened the eyes of someone born blind. So you see, the more the man tells his story over and over again, the more it benefits his faith the most. I realize that's contrary to how we often think of evangelism. We think of evangelism as telling other people about Jesus so that they can grow in faith. But today, the blind man shows us that it's exactly the opposite. Just as Jesus ends the gospel with that contradiction, if you were blind, you would have no sin. But now that you say, we see, your sin remains. So too, each of us, when we share what God is doing in our lives, it helps us grow in faith for our own benefit. It helps us become less judgmental of others. And so we share it not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of others. Maybe you have never thought of evangelism that way, because it can seem scary to share with others something that is so personal about yourself, what you believe about God. But I like to think of it as a gift from God to us. As we tell those stories of God working in our lives, God will continue the makeover for us and maybe just use us to help make over others. Like the man in today's gospel, my preaching professor in seminary was born legally blind. I was amazed at every time he led worship because he would memorize the entire service, word for word. But working with him also led me to realize on numerous occasions how I took my sight for granted. I remember one particular day, it was the spring of my senior year of seminary. It was actually the class immediately following Easter, because we were talking about the Easter Vigil text. And I had asked him a question. I said, why is it that the Easter Vigil text doesn't include Mark chapter 16, verse 8, when the Easter Day text does? He turned toward me and said, what's the text? I said, Mark chapter 16, verse 8. He said, I don't know what that is. Chapter and verse references are visual cues. Since I can't see the text, I don't memorize the verse numbers. Oh, I felt like such a fool. And it's at that moment that I realized that I was the one who was, in so many ways, unable to see. But then I saw God working in that moment as well. I saw God working through someone to help me see the world from a different perspective. And ever since that's happened, it's become part of my life story too. One moment when I knew God intervened to help me see more clearly from another's perspective. Think about it. When was the last time you told your story to someone else? Have you told your children or your grandchildren what first led you to see Christ working in your life? Was it a confirmation class or another religious education experience? Was it a trip to a youth gathering or another service project? Have you ever shared with your spouse those moments when you could just see God at work? When was the last time you talked with friends or coworkers about your faith and how it motivates you to serve? Your story, with all of its joys and sorrows, is one of God's gifts to you. No one else can tell it like you can. So share it. And in the process, God will refine it, just like God refined the story of the man in today's gospel. Share it for others' benefit, and especially for your own. Share it knowing that God has already begun our extreme makeover in the waters of baptism and continues it today with an invitation to Christ's table. So today, go forth and share your story. Share what God has done in your life. And as you do, see how God's amazing grace abounds all the more. Amen.